A mafia boss walks into an upscale restaurant and unleashes a verbal assault in an ancient language, never expecting anyone to understand. But one waitress does. Her perfect response ignites a dangerous connection that will unravel family secrets, expose deadly rivalries, and force two people from opposite worlds to choose between revenge and redemption. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The glass of expensive wine hit the polished marble floor with a crash that made every head in the restaurant turn. Julian Thorne stood at the entrance of Bellissimo, his face twisted with rage, his dark eyes burning like coals. He was a tall man, over 6 feet, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His black hair was slicked back perfectly, and the gold watch on his wrist caught the candlelight as he pointed at the young hostess who was trembling in front of him. "What do you mean my table is occupied?" Julian's voice was low but dangerous, like thunder rolling in before a storm. "I own half this city. That booth has been mine for 3 years." The hostess, barely 20 years old, looked like she might cry. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but you didn't have a reservation tonight, and we seated another party there 15 minutes ago. If you can wait just—" "Wait," Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. He turned to the two men standing behind him, both wearing dark suits and blank expressions. These were his men, his shadows, the people who made sure Julian Thorne got whatever Julian Thorne wanted. "Marcus, did she just tell me to wait?" Marcus, the taller of the two men, didn't answer. He just stared at the hostess with cold eyes. Julian leaned forward, and when he spoke again, he switched to a language most people in Silver City had never heard. It was High Germanic, an ancient dialect that sounded harsh and cutting. The words poured out of his mouth like acid, each one designed to hurt. He called the hostess stupid. He called her worthless. He said she was probably too dumb to even spell her own name. He said the restaurant should fire her and everyone like her because they were all insects beneath his feet. The hostess didn't understand a word, but she understood the tone. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. Other diners whispered to each other, looking uncomfortable but not brave enough to say anything. This was Julian Thorne, after all. Everyone in Silver City knew that name. Everyone knew what it meant. But then a voice cut through the air like a knife through butter. "That's enough." The words were spoken in the same ancient Germanic dialect Julian had been using, but the voice was calm, steady, and completely unafraid. Every person in the restaurant froze. Julian froze. He turned slowly toward the source of the voice. A young woman stood behind the bar, holding a tray of empty glasses. She was maybe 26 or 27, with dark brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard server uniform, black pants and a white button-up shirt. She wasn't wearing makeup, and she didn't need to. Her face was striking, with high cheekbones and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green. But it was the way she looked at Julian that made everyone hold their breath. She wasn't scared. She wasn't nervous. She looked at him like he was a child, throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. Alina set the tray down slowly and walked toward Julian. Her footsteps were quiet on the floor. She stopped about 6 feet away from him and continued speaking in that ancient language, her pronunciation perfect, her grammar flawless. "You stand here like a king whose throne has been taken by a peasant," she said, her voice steady. "But you are in a restaurant, not a castle. These people owe you nothing except the service they would give any customer. You want to insult people in a dead language, thinking no one will understand, thinking you can hide your cruelty behind words from another century." Julian's mouth had fallen open slightly. Marcus took a step forward, but Julian held up his hand to stop him. Alina wasn't finished. "You have two choices. You can walk to the bar like a civilized human being and wait 10 minutes for your precious booth, or you can leave and find somewhere else to act like a spoiled child. I don't care which you choose, but you will not speak to my coworker that way again." The silence in the restaurant was so complete that Julian could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Maybe never. People feared him. They respected him because they feared him. And this woman, this server in a bistro, had just put him in his place using a language he thought only he and a handful of scholars knew. Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly his expression changed. The anger faded, replaced by something else: curiosity, interest. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he suddenly wanted to solve. "What's your name?" he asked, switching back to English. "Alina," she said simply. "Alina," Julian repeated. He looked her up and down, not in a disrespectful way, but like he was memorizing every detail. "Where did you learn High Germanic?" "University," Alina said. "Ancient languages are my specialty. I also speak Latin, Ancient Greek, and Aramaic. Now, are you going to the bar or are you leaving?" Julian did something then that surprised even Marcus. He smiled. It was a real smile, not the cold, calculating expression he usually wore. "The bar," he said. He turned to the hostess, who was still shaking. "I apologize," he said in English, and he actually sounded like he meant it. "That was inappropriate." Then he walked to the bar and sat down like Alina had told him to do. Marcus and the other man exchanged confused glances but followed their boss. The restaurant slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in whispers and murmurs. Alina watched Julian for a moment longer, then turned and went back to work like nothing unusual had happened. But something had happened. Julian Thorne sat at that bar for the full 10 minutes, nursing a glass of whiskey, and his eyes never left Alina. Not once. 3 days later, Alina sat in the corner of a quiet library cafe, papers spread out in front of her. Red pen marks covered most of them. She was grading essays from her students at the university, where she taught part-time while working on her doctorate. The work was slow and tedious, but she liked this cafe. It was always quiet here, tucked away on the 3rd floor of the old Carnegie Library downtown. Most people didn't even know it existed. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Alina looked up out of habit. Then she froze. Julian Thorne walked into the cafe, alone this time, no Marcus or bodyguards following him. He wore dark jeans and a simple black sweater instead of his usual suit, but he was still unmistakable. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Alina immediately. He walked straight to her table. "This seat taken?" he asked. Alina stared at him for a moment. "It's a free country," she said finally. Julian sat down across from her and folded his hands on the table. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Alina went back to grading, her red pen scratching across the paper. Julian just watched her. "How did you find me?" Alina asked without looking up. "I own this building," Julian said simply. Alina's pen stopped moving. She looked up at him. "Of course you do." "I own a lot of buildings in this city," Julian continued. "Restaurants, clubs, office buildings, apartment complexes. This library is one of my favorites, though. It's quiet, peaceful. Not many people know about the cafe up here." "Why are you here?" Alina asked directly. Julian leaned back in his chair. "You fascinate me," he said. "People don't talk to me the way you did, not if they want to keep their teeth." "Is that a threat?" "No," Julian said, and he sounded surprised by his own answer. "It's an observation. You looked at me in that restaurant and you saw right through me. You called me a spoiled child. You weren't wrong." Alina set her pen down and gave him her full attention. "You look like a man haunted by ghosts," she said quietly. Julian flinched like she'd slapped him. "What?" "Your eyes," Alina said. "They're empty. You walk around like you own the world, and maybe you do own parts of it, but you look like a man who's lost something important and doesn't know how to get it back." Julian's jaw tightened. For a moment, Alina thought he might get angry again, might explode like he had in the restaurant. But instead, he let out a long breath and his shoulders sagged slightly. "My father died when I was 19, Julian said, his voice quiet. "He ran the Thorne organization before me. Real estate, construction, some other business ventures. He taught me everything. How to negotiate, how to lead, how to make people respect you. Then one day his heart just stopped. I had to take over everything. I was barely out of my teenage years and suddenly I was responsible for an empire. That sounds hard, Alina said, and she meant it. It was, Julian admitted. Still is. Every day I wake up and put on the mask. The tough boss. The man who can't be challenged. The man who owns half the city. But sometimes I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself anymore. Alina studied him carefully. Why are you telling me this? She asked. You don't know me. Because you're the first person in years who's treated me like I'm just a person, Julian said. Not Julian Thorne, head of the Thorne organization. Just Julian, a man having a bad day who acted like an idiot in a restaurant. Alina picked up her coffee cup and took a sip, thinking, "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Julian said honestly. "Maybe just to talk, about something other than business and money and power. What are you grading?" "Essays on Plato's Republic," Alina said. "My students had to write about the allegory of the cave." Julian's face lit up. "I love that allegory," he said. "The prisoners who think the shadows on the wall are reality, but one prisoner breaks free and sees the real world outside the cave." "You've read Plato?" Alina sounded genuinely surprised. "My father made me read all the classics," Julian said. "Plato, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca. He said if I was going to lead people, I needed to understand philosophy and human nature." For the next hour, they talked. They talked about philosophy and ancient Rome and the difference between justice and vengeance. They talked about books and music and why some people chose power while others chose knowledge. Alina forgot that she was sitting across from one of the most feared men in Silver City. Julian forgot that he was supposed to be that feared man. They were just two people having a conversation. When Julian finally stood up to leave, he looked different somehow, lighter. "Can I see you again?" he asked. Alina hesitated. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was a bad idea. Julian Thorne was dangerous. He lived in a world she wanted nothing to do with. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, something real and vulnerable, and she found herself nodding. "Same time next week," she suggested. "I'll be here," Julian promised, and he was. Over the next month, they met at the library cafe every week, sometimes twice a week. They talked about everything and nothing. Julian told her about the pressure of running his family's organization, about the expectations and the constant stress. Alina told him about her research, about her dream of becoming a professor, about the small apartment she lived in that was overflowing with books and artifacts. Julian never asked her out on a real date, never tried to impress her with his money or power. He just showed up, sat across from her and talked, and slowly, carefully, something grew between them. But Alina had a secret she hadn't told him, a secret that lived in a locked box in the back of her closet, surrounded by old newspaper clippings and police reports. A secret about who Julian Thorne really was and what his family had done. She told herself she would tell him eventually, when the time was right. But the time never seemed right, and the secret grew heavier with each passing day. It was a Tuesday evening when Julian finally called her. Not a text message like usual, but an actual phone call. "Alina," his voice sounded different, nervous. "I know this is sudden, but would you have dinner with me? A real dinner, not coffee at the library." Alina's hand tightened on her phone. "Where?" "There's a place I know. Quiet, private, right on the waterfront, just you and me, no interruptions." Alina looked around her apartment. She looked at the stack of books on her desk, at the artifacts on her shelves, at the ordinary, safe life she'd built for herself. Then she thought about Julian, about the way he smiled when he talked about philosophy, about the vulnerability in his eyes when he let his guard down. "Okay," she heard herself say. "When?" "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, I'll send a car for you." "No," Alina said quickly. "I'll drive myself, just send me the address." There was a pause. "You don't trust me," Julian said, but he didn't sound offended. "I don't trust anyone," Alina replied. Comes with the territory of studying history. Every civilization falls eventually. Every empire crumbles. Julian laughed softly. Fair enough, I'll text you the address. The next night, Alina stood in front of her bathroom mirror staring at her reflection. She'd chosen a simple black dress, nothing fancy, and pulled her hair back in a loose braid. She looked like herself, which was what she wanted. No pretending to be someone she wasn't. But as she grabbed her car keys, she paused at the closet. She opened the door and pulled out the locked box from the back. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photos, police reports, all of them about the same thing: the death of her father 7 years ago. Richard Walsh, killed in what the police called a random mugging gone wrong. But Alina knew better. Her father had been a deep-cover agent, investigating organized crime in Silver City. He'd been close to breaking open a case against a rival organization called the Vane Syndicate when he'd been found dead in an alley downtown, 3 bullets in his chest. Alina had spent years digging into her father's death, following leads the police had ignored, connecting dots they'd missed. And all those dots led to one place: the war between 2 families, the Thorns and the Vanes. Her father had died because he'd gotten too close to the truth about the Vanes, about their weapons trafficking and money laundering and all the evil they did in the shadows. And Julian Thorne, the man she'd been having coffee with for a month, was the head of the family that was at war with the people who'd killed her father. Alina closed the box and locked it again. She'd tell him tonight, she decided. She'd tell him everything. The restaurant Julian had chosen was small and elegant, built on stilts over the water. Waves crashed beneath the deck, and the sun was just setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Alina parked her car and walked up the wooden steps to the entrance. Julian was waiting for her by the door, wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a crime boss and more like a college professor. "You came," he said, smiling. "I said I would," Alina replied. He led her to a private table on the deck, away from the other diners. Candles flickered in glass holders, and the sound of the ocean filled the comfortable silence as they sat down. A waiter appeared, poured wine, and disappeared just as quickly. "This place is beautiful," Alina said, looking out at the water. "My mother used to bring me here when I was a kid," Julian said. "Before she died, it was her favorite spot in the whole city. She'd sit right here and watch the sunset every Sunday." "I didn't know your mother passed," Alina said softly. "Cancer," Julian said. "I was 12. That's when my father started training me to take over the family business. He said I needed to be strong, to be ready, because the world was cruel and only the strong survived." "Is that what you believe?" Alina asked. Julian was quiet for a moment, turning his wine glass in his hands. "I used to," he said finally. "But lately I've been wondering if my father was wrong about a lot of things." They ordered food and talked as the sky grew darker and the stars came out. Julian told her about the pressure of running the Thorn organization, about the constant meetings and decisions and the weight of responsibility. Alina told him about her research, about the ancient texts she was translating, about the civilizations that had risen and fallen throughout history. It was easy, comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. But then Julian's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face changed. The relaxed man across from her disappeared, replaced by the hard, dangerous person she'd met in the restaurant that first night. "What's wrong?" Alina asked. Julian looked up at her and there was fear in his eyes, real fear. "We need to leave right now." Why?" Julian stood up, pulling her to her feet. He looked over at the entrance, where Marcus had suddenly appeared, his face grim. Marcus gave Julian a small nod, and Julian cursed under his breath. "Julian, you're scaring me," Alina said. "The Vane Syndicate," Julian said quietly, pulling her toward a back door she hadn't noticed. "They're here. They've surrounded the building." Alina's blood turned to ice. The Vane Syndicate, the people who'd killed her father. Why would they? She started, but Julian cut her off. Because you're with me, he said, his voice tight with anger and guilt. Because they've been watching me and now they know you matter to me. I'm so sorry, Alina. I never should have brought you here. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass came from the front of the restaurant. Screams. More glass breaking. Julian shoved open the back door and pulled Alina through it. They were on a narrow service deck that ran along the back of the building. Wooden stairs led down to the beach below. Move, Julian shouted. They ran down the stairs as gunshots exploded behind them. Alina heard bullets hitting the wooden deck above their heads, splintering the boards. Her heart hammered in her chest. Julian's hand gripped hers tightly, pulling her across the sand toward the parking lot. Marcus appeared from somewhere, returning fire toward the restaurant. Two other men in suits materialized from the shadows, creating a protective barrier between Julian and the shooters. They reached Alina's car and Julian yanked open the driver's side door. Keys. Alina fumbled in her purse and handed them to him. They jumped in and Julian peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the pavement. Alina twisted in her seat to look back. The restaurant was chaos, people running, more gunshots lighting up the night. "Oh my God," Alina whispered. "Oh my God, those people." "Marcus will handle it," Julian said tightly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He'll make sure everyone gets out safe." They drove in silence for several minutes, Julian taking random turns, checking the mirrors constantly. Finally, he pulled into an underground parking garage and killed the engine. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Julian slammed his fist against the steering wheel. "Damn it," he shouted. "Damn it, damn it, damn it." Alina just sat there, her hands shaking in her lap. Julian turned to her, his face full of anguish. "I'm sorry," he said. "Alina, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get dragged into my world. This was a mistake, all of it." "Who are the Vane Syndicate?" Alina asked quietly. "My family's rivals," Julian said. "We've been at war for years. Territory, business, control of the city. They're ruthless, Alina. They don't care who gets hurt." Alina's mind was racing. The people who killed her father, they were at war with Julian's family, which meant Julian's family had been fighting them, which meant... "Take me home," she said. "Alina, take me home, Julian, now." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They drove to her apartment in silence. When they arrived, Julian parked but didn't turn off the engine. "I can't see you anymore," he said, staring straight ahead. "It's not safe. Tonight proved that. They'll use you to get to me." "I understand," Alina said quietly. "I wish," Julian started, then stopped. "I wish we'd met in another life. When I was just Julian, not the head of the Thorn organization. When you were just Alina, not someone I'm putting in danger just by knowing." Alina reached over and took his hand. "Thank you for keeping me safe tonight," she said. Then she got out of the car and walked to her building without looking back. She heard Julian's car pull away as she unlocked the door. Only when she was safely inside her apartment, door locked behind her, did she let herself break down. She slid down to the floor and cried for the first time in years. Cried for her father, for Julian, for the impossible situation she'd found herself in. Because the truth was, she'd fallen for him. The man who lived in the world that had killed her father. The man who was at war with the people who'd destroyed her family. And she still hadn't told him the truth about who she was. 2 days passed. Alina didn't leave her apartment. She called in sick to the restaurant and canceled her classes at the university. She sat in her living room surrounded by all the research she'd compiled over 7 years, staring at her father's face in an old photograph. Richard Walsh smiled back at her, proud in his police uniform, his arm around a 10-year-old Alina at her 5th grade graduation. She'd been 17 when he died, old enough to understand what happened but too young to do anything about it. Her mother had fallen apart after that, started drinking, couldn't hold down a job. Alina had taken care of her, worked 2 jobs to pay the bills, and somehow still managed to get into college on a scholarship. Her whole life had been shaped by her father's death, by the need to understand why it happened, by the burning desire for justice. And now she'd fallen in love with Julian Thorne. The doorbell rang, making her jump. Alina looked through the peephole and saw Marcus standing there, alone, his hands visible and empty. She hesitated, then opened the door with the chain still attached. "Miss Walsh," Marcus said formally, "may I come in?" Alina's heart stopped. He'd called her Walsh, not whatever last name she'd given Julian. He knew. Of course he knew. A man like Marcus didn't work for someone like Julian without doing thorough background checks on everyone who came close to his boss. She closed the door, slid the chain off, and opened it again. Marcus walked in and she locked the door behind him. They stood in her small living room, surrounded by her father's case files spread across every surface. Marcus looked at the files, at the newspaper clippings, at the photos of crime scenes. His expression didn't change. "How long have you known who I am?" Alina asked. "Since the second time you met Mr. Thorne at the library," Marcus said. "I run background checks on everyone. Alina Walsh, daughter of Richard Walsh, former detective with the Silver City Police Department, killed 7 years ago. You changed your last name to Rossi when you started college, probably to avoid attention." "Does Julian know?" Alina asked. "No," Marcus said. "I was going to tell him, but then I watched the two of you together. I saw how he changed when he was with you. Mr. Thorne hasn't smiled like that since his father died, so I waited. I wanted to see what you would do." "What I would do?" Alina laughed bitterly. "I was trying to get close to him to find out the truth about my father's death. That was the plan. Get close to the Thorne family, figure out what really happened during the war with the Vanes. But then he was—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "He was kind and real, and nothing like I expected." Marcus walked over to her table and picked up one of the police reports. "Your father was investigating the Vane syndicate when he died," he said. "He'd gone undercover, was feeding information to the FBI. He was close to bringing down their entire weapons operation, so they killed him and made it look like a random mugging." "I know all that," Alina said. "What I don't know is what the Thorne family's role was. Were they working with the Vanes, against them? Did they know about my father?" Marcus set the report down carefully. "The Thornes and the Vanes have been enemies for 3 generations," he said. "Julian's grandfather and Victor Vane's grandfather started the feud over territory rights in the 1960s. It's escalated ever since. The Thornes run legitimate businesses mixed with some gray area operations. Real estate, construction, some gambling. The Vanes are different. They deal in weapons, drugs, human trafficking. Pure evil." "So the Thornes are the good guys?" Alina asked skeptically. "I didn't say that," Marcus replied. "But Mr. Thorne isn't his father. Julian's been trying to clean up the family business, go legitimate. It's why the Vanes have been pushing harder lately. They see him as weak." Alina sank down onto her couch. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've worked for Julian Thorne for 8 years, Marcus said. "I've seen him make hard decisions, do things he's not proud of, carry weight that would crush most men. But in the last month I've seen him become the person he was meant to be. Because of you. And now he's locked himself in his office, refusing to eat, barely sleeping, because he thinks staying away from you will keep you safe." "He's probably right," Alina said. "He's not," Marcus said flatly. "The Vanes know about you now. They saw you together. Staying away from Julian won't make you less of a target. It just means you'll be alone when they come for you." Alina looked up sharply. "What?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance but clear enough. Alina walking into her building. The timestamp was from this morning. "They're watching you," Marcus said. "They're waiting for the right moment." Alina felt sick. "So what do I do?" "You tell Julian the truth," Marcus said. "All of it. Who you are, why you got close to him, everything. And then you let him protect you, because he will, even if it costs him everything. Marcus walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Walsh, I think your father would be proud of the woman you've become, and I think he would want you to choose life over revenge. Then he was gone, and Alina was alone with the truth she'd been carrying for 7 years. She looked at her father's photo one more time. Then she grabbed her coat and keys and left the apartment. She had to see Julian. She had to tell him everything before it was too late. The Thorn Organization headquarters was a sleek glass building downtown, 15 stories of legitimate business fronting for what Alina now knew was a complex operation trying to go straight. She walked into the lobby and approached the security desk. "I'm here to see Julian Thorn," she told the guard. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but my name is Alina Walsh. He'll want to see me." The guard made a call, spoke quietly into the phone, then looked up at her with surprise. "Top floor. Mr. Thorne's assistant will meet you at the elevator." The ride-up felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes was waiting. "Miss Walsh, I'm Patricia. Mr. Thorne is in his office. Go right in." She pointed down a hallway. Alina walked on shaking legs to the door at the end. It was slightly open. She pushed it wider and saw Julian standing at the window, looking out at the city. He was wearing suit pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded on the desk. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. "Julian," Alina said softly. He spun around, his eyes going wide. "Alina, what are you doing here? It's not safe, you shouldn't." "I need to tell you something," Alina interrupted. She closed the door behind her. "And you need to listen to all of it before you say anything." Julian stared at her, then nodded slowly. Alina took a deep breath. "My name isn't Alina Rossi, it's Alina Walsh. My father was Richard Walsh, a detective with the Silver City Police Department. 7 years ago, he was working undercover, investigating the Vane Syndicate. They found out and they killed him. 3 bullets left him in an alley like he was garbage." Julian's face went pale. "Alina." "I'm not finished," she said. "I've been tracking the Thorns for years, not because I thought you killed my father, but because I needed to understand the whole picture. The war between your family and the Vanes, where my father fit into it, why he died. So when I met you that night in the restaurant, I already knew who you were. I knew everything about you." Julian stepped back like she'd hit him. "You've been using me," he said quietly. "At first," Alina admitted, tears starting to fall. "At first that was the plan. Get close to you, find out information, figure out the truth. But then I got to know you. The real you. The man who reads Plato and talks about philosophy and looks at the world like he wishes it could be different. I fell in love with you, Julian. I didn't mean to, but I did. And now I'm standing here telling you the truth because you deserve to know who I really am before this goes any further." Julian walked over to his desk and braced his hands on it, his head down. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he laughed, but it was a broken sound. "I thought you were the one pure thing in my life," he said. "The one person who saw me, not the Thorn name or the money or the power, just me. But it was all a lie." "It wasn't all a lie," Alina said desperately. "The feelings are real, Julian. Everything I said to you, everything we talked about, that was real." "How do I know that?" Julian looked up at her, and his eyes were full of pain. "How do I know any of it was real when you've been lying to me from the beginning?" "Because I'm here," Alina shouted. "I'm here telling you the truth when I could have just disappeared. I'm here putting myself in danger because you deserve to know who I am, because I love you and I can't keep lying to you anymore." Julian shook his head. "You need to leave, Alina. It's impossible. Your father died because of the world I live in. How could we ever?" The door burst open and Marcus rushed in. "Sir, we have a problem. The Vanes just grabbed Alina's mother from her nursing home." Everything stopped. Alina felt the room tilt. "What?" Marcus looked grim. "Victor Vane just sent a message. He wants a meeting. You and him alone. He says if you don't show up in 2 hours, he'll kill Sarah Walsh." Alina's legs gave out. Julian caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her into a chair. "My mother," Alina whispered. "Oh God, my mother. She's sick. She has dementia. She doesn't understand what's happening." Julian's face had gone hard, all the pain replaced by cold fury. "Where does he want to meet?" he asked Marcus. "The old Hammond warehouse on the East Docks," Marcus said. "It's a trap, sir. Obviously a trap." "I know," Julian said. "But we're going anyway. Get everyone ready." "Julian, no." Alina grabbed his arm. "You can't, he'll kill you." Julian looked down at her and some of the hardness softened. "I'm not going to let him hurt your mother," he said quietly. "I couldn't save your father, but I can save her. I will save her." "My father's death wasn't your fault," Alina said. "Maybe not," Julian said. "But my family's war with the Vanes created the situation that killed him. So yes, Alina, it is my fault. And I'm going to end this tonight, one way or another." Over the next 2 hours, Julian planned like a general going to war. Marcus assembled a team of 12 men, all armed, all loyal. They studied blueprints of the warehouse, planned entry points and escape routes. Julian gave orders calmly, his voice steady, every inch the leader his father had trained him to be. Alina watched all of this from a corner of the office, feeling helpless and terrified. This was her fault. Her mother was in danger because Alina had gotten involved with Julian, because she'd let herself be seen with him, because she'd fallen in love with a man whose world was built on violence. At 7:30, Julian walked over to where Alina sat. He knelt down in front of her and took her hands. "I need you to stay here," he said gently. "Patricia will keep you safe. I promise I'll bring your mother back." "What if you don't come back?" Alina asked, her voice breaking. Julian smiled sadly. "Then Marcus will take care of everything. He has instructions. You'll be safe, your mother will be safe, and the evidence I've been gathering on the Vanes will go to the FBI. Victor Vane will go to prison for the rest of his life." "Evidence?" Alina said. "What evidence?" "I've been building a case against the Vanes for 2 years," Julian said. "Everything. The weapons trafficking, the murders, the corruption, including proof that Victor personally ordered your father's death. I was going to hand it all over to the authorities once I had enough to make sure they'd never get out. But if something happens to me tonight, Marcus knows what to do." Alina threw her arms around him. "Don't go," she whispered. "Please don't go." Julian held her tight. "I have to," he said. "Your mother needs me, and I need to end this war, for you, for me, for everyone who's been hurt by this feud." He pulled back and kissed her forehead. Then he stood up and walked out with Marcus and the team. Alina sat in that office for the next 3 hours, barely breathing. Patricia brought her tea that she didn't drink. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each one an eternity. She thought about her father, about the last time she'd seen him, the morning he'd left for work and never came home. She thought about her mother, confused and scared somewhere in that warehouse. And she thought about Julian, walking into a trap to save them both. At 10:45 her phone rang. It was Marcus. "We have your mother," he said. "She's safe, minor dehydration but otherwise unharmed." Alina sobbed with relief. "And Julian?" There was a long pause, too long. "Marcus," Alina's voice cracked. "Where's Julian?" "There was an explosion at the warehouse," Marcus said carefully. "A fire. We got Mrs. Walsh out, but Julian and Victor Vane were still inside when it went up. We couldn't get back in. The whole building collapsed." "No," Alina whispered. "No, no, no." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. "The police and fire department are there now. They're searching the rubble, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Alina dropped the phone. Patricia caught her as she collapsed, holding her as she screamed Julian's name over and over until her voice gave out. The next 3 days were a blur. The news reported that Julian Thorne and Victor Vane had died in an explosion at an abandoned warehouse, apparently meeting to settle their family's long feud. The details were vague, but the message was clear. Both men were dead. The war was over. Alina sat at her mother's bedside in the hospital, holding her hand while Sarah Walsh slept peacefully, unaware of what had happened. The doctors said she was fine physically, just needed rest and fluids. She didn't remember being kidnapped. Her dementia was a mercy in that way. Marcus came to visit on the third day. He brought a manila envelope and a small black box. "Mr. Thorne left these for you," he said quietly, "with instructions to give them to you if anything happened to him." Alina took the items with shaking hands. Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a letter. The box contained a simple silver ring. She waited until Marcus left before she opened the letter. Julian's handwriting was neat and precise. Alina *, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry. I wanted more time with you. I wanted a lifetime. But some things are more important than what we want." The USB drive contains everything I have on the Vane syndicate, including proof that Victor ordered your father's death. Marcus has already given copies to the FBI. Victor will face justice, even if I can't be there to see it. I've also liquidated most of my assets. The legitimate businesses will continue to operate under new management. The money from everything else is being donated to scholarships for children who have lost parents to violence. There's a fund set up in your father's name. It will help hundreds of families. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that meeting you changed everything. You made me want to be better. You made me believe I could leave this life behind and be just Julian, not Julian Thorne. The ring was my mother's. She left it to me before she died and told me to give it to someone who saw the real me. That's you, Alina. You saw me, all of me, and you didn't look away. Live your life. Become the professor you want to be. Take care of your mother. And maybe, sometimes, remember that you were loved by a man who didn't deserve you but loved you anyway. Julian. Alina cried until she couldn't cry anymore. Then she put the ring on a chain around her neck and went back to holding her mother's hand. 4 months later, Alina stood in her mother's room at a new care facility in the mountains of British Columbia. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by pine trees and snow-covered peaks. Sarah Walsh sat by the window, looking out at the view, humming softly to herself. She seemed happy here, even if she didn't always know where here was. There was a knock at the door. A man Alina didn't recognize stood there, holding a package. "Miss Walsh," he said, "I have a delivery for you." Alina took the package, confused. Inside was another USB drive and a note with just 2 words, "Thomas Miller." Her heart stopped. She looked up at the man, but he was already walking away down the hall. That night, Alina plugged the drive into her laptop. There was one video file. With shaking hands, she clicked play. Julian's face filled the screen. He looked different, his hair longer and lighter, a beard covering his jaw, but it was definitely him. "Alina," he said, and his voice made her chest ache. "I'm sorry for the deception. The explosion was real, but I wasn't in the warehouse when it happened. I made sure Victor was, though. He's dead. The war is over, but I couldn't come back to the life I had before. Julian Thorne needed to die so that I could finally be free." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "I have a new life now in a small town on the coast. A new name, a new identity. I work at a research library. It's quiet, peaceful, everything I never thought I could have." Another pause. "I'm not asking you to come find me. You deserve better than a dead man. But if you want to, Marcus knows where I am. The choice is yours, Alina. It's always been yours." The video ended. Alina sat staring at the blank screen for a long time. Then she called Marcus. 6 weeks later, Alina drove down a narrow road in a tiny coastal town in Nova Scotia. Fog rolled in from the ocean, making the world gray and mysterious. She'd sold her apartment in Silver City, arranged for her mother's care to be continued at the facility in British Columbia, and loaded everything she owned into her car. She'd been given an address, a cottage at the end of a dirt road overlooking the sea. Alina pulled up and saw him before she even got out of the car. He was sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, a book in his lap. His hair was sandy brown now instead of black, and the beard made him look older, but she would have known him anywhere. Thomas Miller, Julian Thorne, the man she loved. He stood up slowly as she got out of the car, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Alina walked up the porch steps. They stood facing each other for a long moment, neither speaking. "You came," Julian finally said, his voice rough. "You saved my mother," Alina replied. "You took down the people who killed my father. You gave up everything for me. Of course I came." "I'm not Julian Thorne anymore," he said. "I'm just Thomas now, a guy who works at a library and lives in a cottage and has a boring, normal life." "Good," Alina said, "because I'm just Alina, a professor who likes ancient languages and old books and quiet mornings." Julian smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "We match then." "We match," Alina agreed. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring she still wore on a chain around her neck. "I never thought I'd get a second chance," he said quietly. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Alina said, "even people who think they don't." They stood on that porch as the fog rolled in and the ocean crashed against the rocks below. Two people who'd lost everything and found each other in the wreckage. Two people choosing to build something new from the ruins of their old lives. 1 year later, Alina stood in front of a classroom at the local college, teaching a course on ancient civilizations. Her students were engaged, asking questions, excited about history. It was everything she dreamed of. Thomas picked her up after class and they walked through town hand in hand like any normal couple. They stopped at the grocery store, the coffee shop, the library where Thomas worked. People waved and said hello. Nobody knew who they used to be. Nobody cared. That evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we can't have a big wedding," he said. "I know we can't invite people from our old lives, but I want you to be my wife, Alina. Not because of who we were, but because of who we are now. Just Thomas and Alina." Alina opened the box. Inside was a simple silver band, no diamonds or gold, just pure and plain and perfect. "Yes," she said, "1,000 times yes." Thomas slipped the ring on her finger, and Alina took the one she'd worn on a chain for over a year and put it on his finger. They sat there as the sun disappeared into the ocean and the stars came out, two people who'd walked through fire and somehow found peace on the other side. The past would always be there, a shadow they carried. Alina's father would never come back. The people who died in the war between the families couldn't be saved. But they could honor those losses by living well, by choosing love over revenge, by building something good from all the pain. Julian Thorne was dead. Alina Walsh from Silver City was gone. But Thomas and Alina Miller were alive and they had each other, and sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Thank you for watching. Would you risk everything for love if it meant facing your darkest truths? Could you forgive someone whose world destroyed yours? Drop a comment below with your thoughts and your location. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.